and the reason why you'll see it, because they're so complicated. Yeah. So.
Well, I'm going to start the recording. We have 3 folks on the call. Welcome everyone to day after a crazy election. I know that everybody's sort of in a crazy dazed state today, and this will be a welcome distraction, I think. We have to imagine and hope that everything's going to be good and we'll all be okay. So Anusha is presenting case studies tonight for everyone. And as she mentioned before we put the recording on, these are case studies that she's just started working with. So, these are not necessarily people that have implemented recommendations as such yet. And then this is the case study webinar sessions are really designed for you to ask questions and for a little bit more interplay. So Anusha will lead you into, that when the time is right, and you can unmute if you want to, or just as you've been doing, put the chats in. And what's helpful, I think, Anusha, I'm pretty sure chats show up in the recording, but repeat the question when you go into the explanation. Just so those that are only viewing the recording have a chance to understand what's been asked. All right, well, I'm going to sign off for now and mute, and we'll let, there's Matt. Hi, Matt. We're just getting started. Welcome, and we'll let Anusha take over, and we'll close the session at 9:30 Eastern Time.
Okay, I'm having a little problem here, but it's working now.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Well, welcome. All right, Nusha, all yours.
Okay. So welcome back, everyone. It's so good to see you. And we're going to try and stay positive and keep smiling and try to keep bringing out our innate aura that we know that exists regardless of what is happening in our environment. It does take time to process, but if you're Agni and Tejas is strong, then you can manage and deal with anything. Okay? So we're going to try and keep our Tejas strong, and we're going to try and keep our Ojas strong, and try to keep cultivating that and not expend it in sometimes trying times. Okay, so before we get started, let's start with a prayer. And this prayer can be for our class, and it can be a prayer for everyone else and everything else that's going on too. Okay. Yo Vishwam Vidadhati Pati Satatam Samharayatyanjasa Srishtva Devya Mahasjadischa Vividhan Duri Karotyamayan Vibhrano Jalana Chakasti Bhuvane Piyushapurnam Ghatam Tam Dhanvantari Rupamishamalam Vandamahe Shreyase Vandamahe Shreyase Vandamahe Shreyase. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Okay, so good to see you all tonight. Today we are going to try to distract ourselves and concentrate on some good things, such as case studies regarding fibromyalgia. Okay, so this is somewhat of a continuation of what we had last week, where we were talking about fibromyalgia and the Ayurvedic perspective of it. And we did kind of come to the conclusion, or basically look at it as a Sama Vata condition where it is manifesting in the Astiva Shrotas and the Majjava Shrotas. Okay, and that coincides with looking at the fact that it is definitely a Vataja condition, and it is affecting the Majja Dhatu. It's affecting the centers in the brain that is responsible for pain perception, as well as other aspects as well. It's not just localized there, but it's looking at various aspects and functions of Vata and the hyperfunctioning of Vata. Okay, so so just to let you all know, there's no PowerPoint for today. If I do put the PowerPoint on just for the explanation part, it's the PowerPoint you already have, just for review and discussion of the case. But for the most part, I'm just going to share 2 cases that I have with you. These are cases, by the way, of people that I know, and I have taken their history. I thought they were really interesting fibromyalgia cases. However, just to let you know, as you will see, these are somewhat complicated and very chronic cases, and neither one was really completely ready to commit to an Ayurvedic sort of diet and lifestyle change, and even an Ayurvedic treatment perspective. But even then, they were very willing to share their cases and share their history. So for the purpose of learning and being able to understand how these diseases and these conditions present and how we would look at it from the Ayurvedic perspective, I really wanted to share that with you. And one of the other cases, occasionally for pain management, I actually was able to see that person, but they would never wanted to go beyond the pain management perspective just for that one-time thing, and then carried on with the usual lifestyle that they were leading before. Okay, so the first case study that I have is a 46-year-old female. She actually has been diagnosed with fibromyalgia. And just to tell you a bit of, so her symptoms are that she does have widespread pain. Her pain seems to be fairly constant, except that, it does get worse upon activity. So, for instance, while she's active, the pain isn't there as much, but upon resting after activity, then the pain can become very severe, and it can even get to the point where it is very debilitating. So for instance, if she goes for a long walk, or if she goes shopping for a good few hours, afterwards, the next day, she needs a whole day to rest and recuperate from that sort of activity. So it can get fairly painful and debilitating for her lifestyle. Her background is that her occupation, she is a psychologist, and she works with autistic kids as a counselor. Prior to that, she was working with people who had serious mental health issues, who were abused and suicidal, and so a fairly great amount of psychological stress from her job, just to have that background as well. So her history is fairly a long one, and this was the important part that I wanted you guys to keep in mind. So her history is that since her teenage years, she has had issues with menstrual disorders. She's had excessive bleeding, and it used to be, she said it was fairly painful, and it would last for up to 10 days. And they did diagnose her eventually with PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome. And so she was put on birth control to help to regulate the hormones and to help to regulate her reproductive hormones to somewhat prevent the onset or prevent any further production of the cysts in her ovaries. And in 1993, she's had this menstrual disorder since her teenage years. In 93, she said that she was starting to feel some pain in her throat, and she had difficulty in swallowing. Sometimes it would be even a little bit difficult to breathe. So she went into the doctor, and they checked. They did a couple of scans and tests, and she said that they thought she might have a goiter. They did do a biopsy of it, and they found that it did have abnormal cells. She was choking and felt difficulty in breathing. Okay, and the biopsy showed that the cells could possibly be precancerous. In 2003, she did develop the goiter, and it had grown substantially. There was also an issue with the underactive thyroid, and when they did check her thyroid, it was full of nodules. So because of that, she did end up having to go for a surgery, and they took out the goiter, her thyroid, and her parathyroid. So since 2003, after the surgery, she's had to take synthetic thyroid hormones. Also, after that, that led to an onset of other symptoms. So she actually ended up developing this vitamin D deficiency. So for that, she had to end up taking a lot of supplements, and she had to take high amounts of calcium intake. She also developed a lot of allergies. So previous to this, she had some mild skin allergies, which she said kind of runs in her family. She did have a family history of skin allergies, and it was, you know, she had very sensitive skin. But after her thyroid was taken out, after the surgery, she developed sensitivity and allergies to fruits, all different types of fresh fruits and nuts as well, which she did not have before. She says that after that because of the vitamin deficiency, she did find that, you know, whenever she was in sunny climates, she would feel much better. Her pain wouldn't be as severe. She would actually feel more energetic. In 2008, she got pregnant. That was her first pregnancy, and she was at the age of, I think it was 36, and that was her first pregnancy. After she already had these issues with, you know, her reproductive hormones, and during the pregnancy, there was a substantial increase in the amount of pain that she felt. She said that she felt a lot of pain in her back, hips, hands, feet, calves, and joints. And after the delivery of her son, so during the pregnancy, she felt some pain. Then towards the end of the pregnancy, in the last trimester, she actually started to feel a little bit better. And then after the delivery, then the pain and everything got worse and came back again. And so that caused the widespread pain to then become constant. It was not coming and going anymore. It then started to become constant. So she thought it was because of, you know, her complicated delivery and her other reproductive health issues that she was having this pain, but it didn't seem to go away. So then she did have to go back to the doctors, and they did end up diagnosing her with fibromyalgia. So she says she feels aches and pains she feels aches and pains in her body as if she has a fever. And these were her exact words. You know, she feels like if she has a fever inside her body, that's how achy it is, except she doesn't actually have a rise in temperature, okay? And she does have crepitus in her joints, mostly in her knees, and she also tends to feel a lot of pain in her hips. She says she feels like it locks and pops quite often. And I saw her, you know, after sitting and talking with me about this, when she got up, it was almost like it was locked in place. So she got up, and then she had to kind of maneuver her way around to then sort of straighten out her body so then she could walk again. So you've ever seen, like, sometimes certain elderly people, like usually in their 80s or so, when they sit for a really long time and then they get up, they kind of have to, like, hold on to their back and then straighten it out and then somehow support themselves to kind of waddle and walk. That's exactly how she walked. So it showed, the amount of stiffness that she really had. And it was mostly in her, she says she feels it more in her hips and in her knees. And exactly this locking and popping she described. She says that if she is squeezed, like for instance, if someone puts compression on her or she gets massages where it's more deep tissue or there's a lot of compression, she feels better with that. So coming to her appetite and her Agni, her appetite is very irregular. Her diet is fairly irregular. So she basically eats whenever she gets a chance because of her work. The type of things she eats, she does tend to eat a lot of processed food. She eats, canned food. She eats frozen foods. She says that she's not a very good cook and she doesn't know how to cook, so she prefers to, she has to manage to survive somehow. So she prefers, ready-made meals. And that's what it's either that or she eats out. So those are her type of foods. She is a vegetarian, and with occasionally she'll have fish. And she says that her bowel movements are sometimes once a day or once every 2 days. They're not necessarily constipated, but they're usually, she doesn't necessarily feel satisfied after her bowel movements. She tends to have somewhat oily skin. Her urine output is around 8 to 10 times per day. She has ridges on her nails, and her tongue has a fairly thick coating, especially towards the back of the tongue or the root of the tongue, and there are small cracks kind of spread out throughout the tongue. Another thing that was interesting about her tongue is that it looked like this. This is what her tongue looked like. So if you can see here, it had a lot of very prominent ridges on the sides. It was definitely not a clear delineated line, which, you don't always get that, but hers was very prominent, okay? So she did say that she has a lot of skin allergies. Sometimes she occasionally has seasonal allergies as well. At the moment, she still has issues with her menstrual cycle. She's still getting them, but it can be somewhat irregular. Sometimes it's 28 days to 40 days that she can have her cycle. When she does have menstruation, it can last anywhere between 3 to 7 days. Usually it tends to be more spotting after the third day. If she has a lot of activity, then it can be quite painful as well and debilitating to the point where she needs to take a day off for that first or second day to rest because she just is in so much pain that she can't go out and do her work. So these were basically what she described. Her prakriti is sort of a vata kapha prakriti, because she does have a lot of issues in the way she describes things. She moves here and there a lot, but she also, in the way she spoke, was very, very calming. So though she couldn't express an idea very clearly, it was sort of jumping from here to there. But other than that, all her other characteristics, like what she described is how she was before she got sick, or what her preferences are, things that she likes, is more of a kapha nature. So she has that vata and kapha quality in her. So this is the case this case of fibromyalgia. Before we start discussing what the treatment might be, I would just like to, if anyone wants to chime in and either ask questions about the case, or if you would like to share what you think may be the case, or how you would understand this from an Ayurvedic perspective. So would anyone like to share, or anyone would like to contribute their ideas?
Well, definitely lifestyle and diet and her life history contributed, as well as the initial PCOS as a teenager and being on birth control for how many years? Probably 15 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then the thyroid issue. So her whole hormone system was out of balance. So the body really has no concept of regulating any kind of vata, which is why the vata is so prominent.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other thoughts? Anyone else want to chime in? Seems like pitta is also present in skin. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So this is a condition of it's not necessarily just an amavata. It is definitely samavata, to the point of the asti and majjadhatu. But what is interesting about this case, and why I wanted to share with you, is the history. Her history was very important, and her history was really, if we look at it, you can actually trace and see from the chronological order how each one of the dhatus is getting aggravated by this constant production of ama, and how she's ending up with issues in each and every one of the dhatus. So for instance, the menstrual disorder, whenever you have any issues with menstrual disorder, it is definitely related to, yes, absolutely, the fever sensation also in her cycle. The menstrual disorders are almost always related to pitta, dosha, and obviously rakta dhatu, because it is manifesting in the rakta dhatu. So that means that it is basically, if it manifests in rakta dhatu, it's also understood that it is aggravating in rasa dhatu as well, because you can't really separate rasa and rakta dhatu. They're both very much close to each other, or basically one kind of entity. So when you have menstrual disorders, it does affect the rasa and rakta dhatu. Now you see here that she had skin allergies, she has skin issues as well. It's kind of coming up a little bit, but it hasn't, and she says she has a pre-existing condition of the family history of skin allergies and skin sensitivity. So that started from way before. That started from even her teenage years. She's had this issue. So as you can see, it started off superficially, or it started off with the more superficial, or the upper dhatus, and it slowly started to trickle down and started to affect the other dhatus as well. Then it gets to the mamsa dhatu, which is actually goiter is considered as a growth or excess growth, abnormal growth of the mamsa dhatu. So goiters is affecting the mamsa dhatu. The meda dhatu happens when you have issues with the thyroid, especially in hypothyroid issues. And as you can see, even if you're taking out the thyroid gland, you'll say, well, she didn't really develop this thyroid issue beforehand, it's because they took out her thyroid. Well, the reason why she's getting it in her thyroid, or her thyroid is getting affected, is because all of the dhatus preceding meda dhatu is already affected. So it is naturally going to start affecting the functions where meda dhatu does carry out its functions, right? Because if we look at the process of nourishment, the nourishment goes also in that same successive order. So that's why this aggravation, or this vikriti that she had, started from her teenage years, and it has kept building and building and building, and it keeps getting, it's not being treated really, it's somewhat being managed but not really being managed. The cause of the issue, with which is her diet and lifestyle, is a consistent energy that is feeding into, or a consistent source for this roga to keep advancing and keep growing and keep progressing. So it first starts off in rasa and rakta dhatu. It keeps getting bigger and stronger and stronger. It advances then to mamsa dhatu, then to medo dhatu. And after her pregnancy, the reason why in the beginning of the pregnancy there's such a fluctuation of hormones, that she did feel the pain and she did feel that issues with the sort of widespread pain as you would find in fibromyalgia. But then towards the end of it, in the last trimester, she felt better because the hormones actually was able to somewhat balance off some of the weird nature of her hormone release. So in the last trimester, she actually felt better than she did in the beginning. But then once the source or the cause for that hormone fluctuation was gone, which is after the delivery, after her son was born, now that hormone fluctuation cause isn't there anymore. So again, instead it reverted back into even worse of a condition. She ended up being even worse off than she was before the pregnancy, because she also didn't really get a chance to take care of herself that much after the pregnancy. She did have maternity leave and she took about 6 months off, she said. But the problem was that she had so many other health issues, and her son also had some health issues as well, that she didn't get a chance to really take care of herself or rest or recuperate after the delivery. The postpartum care was completely absent. So that just led for her symptoms to become even more worse, for the vyadhi or the vikrati to become even stronger, and then further start to affect even the lower dhatus. That's why he started having issues, notice, with vitamin D and calcium deficiency, which is nothing but, again, the asti dhatu, and then getting to the point where it's affecting widespread pain, which, as we saw in the last description, it's then affecting also the majja dhatu, or the part of the brain that is responsible for pain perception. So as you can see here in her history, remember we kept talking about that timeline and that storyboard. So in that's why I wanted to present this case in such a way that you can actually start to visualize and see that storyline of her disease progression. And it kept building and building and building. And the other added factor upon all of this is the fact that she's a psychologist and she's dealing with this very highly stressful work environment. She said that, at one point, she actually did leave her job because it was too stressful, because she is an empath and she does feel the pain of her patients, to the point where she just could not take it anymore. And so she actually quit her job and took some time off for about 6 months where she wasn't working at all, just to try and, recuperate and try to get out of that situation of how she was feeling when she was doing that job. She loved being a psychologist, but she just couldn't be in the situation that she was in because it was too much. It was too much that she was taking on, and she was feeling too much for her clients. She said that she would feel their pain and they would feel better, but then she would actually end up taking on their pain. And then it was very hard for her to process that, or process those emotions, or to protect herself from those emotions. So she had multiple factors, multiple issues. And as you can see here, it still did go back to her diet, her lifestyle, and, and her work, her psychological balance or health, that all had very important parts to play in how the disease progressed to this point. So she said that that recently her doctor said that the reason why she's having this pain is a vitamin D deficiency, and that if they up her vitamin D intake, that it will help to reduce some of the pain. Now, if you notice that vitamin D is one of the things responsible for the processing or absorption of calcium, and how we process that, or how we actually help to break that down or to actually use it, is by the sun. So you notice there also is a nice little factor if we look at it from an Ayurvedic perspective. That's nothing but, again, looking at the Agni and the lack thereof of Agni inside the body. So that's why the body naturally feels a little bit better, temporary relief, by just getting exposure to the external Agni or the environmental Agni, where that person's Agni is naturally diminished. That's why you notice even when people have just a mild amount of ama, if they're in warmer climates or if they're in the sunshine, it helps to relieve some of the symptoms of ama, as opposed to when they're in a colder place, or if they're in the shadow, devoid of sunlight, then it enhances the qualities or the symptoms of ama. So in all perspectives here, it still does indicate a very long-standing, deep-seated production and presence of ama, all the way down in all of the dhatus, is reaching all the way down to the Majja Dhatu. And if it is at the Majja Dhatu, and you can actually even say somewhat to the Shukra Dhatu as well, because she did say that after her first child, she did try quite a few times to have a second child, but she couldn't. The doctor said that it was because of her health conditions and because of her irregular hormones. But she tried, and she was impregnated once, but she had a miscarriage after 2 months. And it wasn't due to, they couldn't figure out exactly why she had that miscarriage, but that also led to even more of psychological distress because of the situation of the miscarriage. So it was, this case really indicates how our diet and lifestyle has such a huge impact. And if we don't take notice of what our body is telling us, if we don't take notice of what signs and symptoms are being exhibited, it will just keep building and building and growing, and it keeps gaining that momentum and energy. Remember, I was telling you the Roga Bala as well as the Rogi Bala. Well, this is exactly an example of the Roga Bala, the strength of the disease that keeps building and building and building, and it just keeps getting deeper and deeper and deeper into the dhatus. If we want to look at it in Roga Marga, there also it applies, because it starts off with the production of ama in the koshta. It then starts to exhibit symptoms in the Bahya Marga, in the skin, and then also in Goiter. Goiter is actually one from the Bahya Marga. Then after that, it starts to exhibit issues in the internal and the Madhyama Marga, which is affecting the bones, affecting the muscles, affecting the joints. So it's actually, it will eventually get to the point where it will start to affect even the Abhyantara Marga, or the most internal pathway. So here you can see how it has progressed, and hopefully you were able to see the progression and the timeline and the storyline of this disease. Okay. Does anyone else have any questions about the case, or any comments or anything you would like to add before we start talking about the treatment, or what ideally? So I haven't been able to give her the treatment yet because she's actually not really ready to take that. She still is convinced. She's come to me a couple of times for more of massage and sort of pain relief, and I've tried to convince her of, maybe if you try this, or maybe if you do your diet and lifestyle. But since she's more of a friend and an acquaintance than a patient, she wasn't ready at this stage to be able to take advice to actually do an Ayurvedic intervention. She just wanted to hear about what we would do, or what are some good things that maybe she can incorporate into her lifestyle. And also because she does have this psychology background, and she does have this other sort of conventional medical background, it's sort of hard for her to believe that by just doing some diet and lifestyle changes that she really can make an impact on her health. So she's interested, but not committed enough to want to do this. Be very committed to an Ayurvedic sort of intervention. Would initial issues as a teenager and menstrual problems show that Atava was already affected, thus poor Ojas? Yes, absolutely. But the thing is, when Atava is affected, it isn't necessarily immediately to Ojas. It only actually indicates an issue with Ojas when it comes to actual impregnation. If there's an issue with fertility, then it indicates that is an issue with Shukra Dhatu and Ojas. But when it comes to menstruation and Artava, that actually indicates that is a function of the Rakta Vahashrotas and Artava Vahashrotas. They're very much similar. So it's actually Artava, and menstrual cycle is more related to the upper dhatus and the Rakta Vahashrotas, as opposed to affecting the Shukra Vahashrotas. When it comes to actual fertility, then it is affecting the Shukra Vahashrotas. That's why there is a difference in, they have used different terms. This is the reason why they use, instead of it just being Rakta Vahashrotas and Artha Vahashrotas, and they also talk about Shukra or impregnation, and what is the purpose or the function of Shukra Dhatu is for Garbha Utpada, for fertility. Okay, so that's why they've used two different terms. So even though it's the actual area or the anatomy of where this thing is happening, or this menstruation is occurring, is in the same place where the Shukra Vahashrotas is there, it's actually more in relation to the Rakta Vahashrotas than it is in reflection to the Shukra Vahashrotas. Because the Shukra Vahashrotas is actually the gonads. Okay? Regular massage for her, water intake, tongue cleaning. Yeah, regular massage would help, except for the fact that she does have ama, and she has very deep-seated ama. The reason why I mentioned here, and I asked this question specifically of how do you feel if you get a massage, because remember, in the signs and symptoms of Sama, Vata and Vata affecting the Asti and Majadhatu, the specific indication there is the person feels better on compression. That was one of the indicators that it is affecting the Asti Dhatu and the Majja Dhatu, that is what is blocking the Vata, or that's where the Vata is located. So I asked that specific question of, do you feel better if you have a massage? And she said yes. So I asked her if it is a compression, or if it's like a deep tissue massage, or if it's like a kneading. She said she likes the kneading and she likes the compression, but she doesn't necessarily like the deep tissue and where it is at a point that you're working on. She doesn't like that, but she likes the kneading and she likes the compression, which is exactly what has been described. If you go back to the PowerPoint, that's exactly what have been described for Asti and Majadhatu. Okay. Deepana Pachana to help the malabsorption issues. Yes, absolutely. The first and foremost thing we would want to do is Deepana Pachana. So I'll just read to you what, if I were to do a treatment intervention or a treatment plan for her, ideally what I would love to do for her, if she was ready for it, I did write it down, so I'll share with you what my treatment plan for her would be. So of course, first we would need to absolutely counsel her and teach her about a more healthy diet and lifestyle, and look at ways that would be appropriate for her according to her schedule and according to things that are going on. So I actually really like this idea of having these small little individual crock pot cookers that people can take with them and have freshly cooked meals and it doesn't really take too much time, especially when they have a very high-paced schedule and they don't necessarily have access to freshly cooked food, or the food that they do have access to is extremely unhealthy. Then the best thing that they can do is they can get a little, one of those little portable crock pots, and there are so many things you can make in that. You can make oatmeal, you can make khichdi, you can make soup, you can make just about anything in that small individual little crock pot. So when they put in the stuff that they need, for whatever they want to have for lunch, they put it in the crock pot. When they get to work, just plug it in. And by the time lunch comes around, within about an hour and a half to 2 hours, they have a fresh cooked meal. And it's nice and warm, and it's not something that is processed. It is not something that is unhealthy for them, and they can mix and match and make whatever it is that they want. You can tailor make what is necessary for that person so they can have their own little meal. So that's a nice little way to encourage people to have fresh cooked, hot, or warm meals that are healthy for them, and not opt for the stuff that they will get probably in the cafeteria or in fast food, or, well, I'm traveling, this is the only thing I have. Well, even in traveling, it's a very small little crock pot, so it's very easy that you can take it anywhere. Okay, so that's something that I find that people can somewhat adjust to, and still keep in line with what we would want to advise for them, or what we know would be beneficial for them. Of course, she needs amapachana, as you mentioned, Betty, Deepanapachana. So for her, again, the best Deepanapachana would be the Gandhava Hastadi Kashaya. And in this case, since it is such deep-seated ama, you can even kick it up a notch and add in Gandhava Hastadi Kashaya with Trikatu powder, or Gandhava Hastadi with Hingvashtaka Churna, because that adds in one extra layer of trying as much as possible to digest that ama and to get the Agni back again, to ignite the Agni again, and also to help to get the Agni ignited in the dhatus as well, the dhatva Agnis, to help to digest the ama that has reached to the dhatus, because that's the one that's going to take a little bit more time. The only way to really ignite the dhatva Agnis is first to have a fully nice, strong, healthy, functioning Jatar Agni. So that's why you want to add a little bit of an extra element in the Deepanapachana there. So not just Gandhava Hastadi Kashayam, but Gandhava Hastadi Kashaya with another one of the formulas that we use for Deepanapachana, such as Trikatu powder or Hingvashtaka Churna. So typically how I do that is, depending on, of course, their schedule. If they're busy and they don't have access to hot water or can't take their kashaya with them to work, then you can understand and have them take it just twice a day, before breakfast and before dinner, around 20 minutes before the meal, on an empty stomach with the warm water, diluted with the warm water. And if you're adding in the powder, they can mix the powder in the kashaya and when they take it. So you take about anywhere between a teaspoon to about a half a tablespoon, depending on how much of ama the person has. I would suggest about a teaspoon for her, because she did have quite a bit of ama. Clearly, it's indicated in her symptoms. But the ama, if you look at for the tongue, she had it more towards the root of her tongue. Of course, the ridges, the sort of squiggly margin of her tongue really indicates severe malabsorption and severe deficiency. Nutritive deficiency for you would think for all of her dhatus, because of that sort of squiggly margins on her tongue. Okay, so that would help. Of course, she needs to eat really fresh cooked, very nutritious food. So nutritious in the sense that it has vitamins and it has all the nutrients that you need, but also very well cooked. So another reason why the crock pots work well, because it's being cooked for a very long period of time. So even if the person is eating nutritious food, it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be hard to digest. It can still be easy to digest, because it's cooked for a long period of time, but also still have the nutrition that the person needs. Okay, so another reason why these crock pots are a really great idea. It's for convenience, as well as it serves the purpose of what we're trying to give them. Okay, so so that's the kind of food that she'd want to have. Of course, the food is all vata pacifying, you know. Definitely no beans as such, and any type of beans. And also, if she's going to have, you would want to stay away from green leafy vegetables, because green leafy vegetables are, remember, if we go back to the nidanas for vata vyadis or nidanas for aggravation of vata, green leafy vegetables actually aggravate vata. So you want to have, if she does, if they do need to have green leafy vegetables like spinach or kale or something like that, it can be maybe once in a while, like once a week, and it has to be cooked really, really well, like in a stew or a soup, or cooked down completely. Then only it can be suitable. Otherwise, probably just take it out of their diet completely for at least 2 to 3 weeks. Okay? And so same with the beans. So those are the things you want to make sure that they avoid. Lifestyle, of course, since this is a case where the person does have ama and actually they do feel better after movement, the only thing is they feel exhausted once they stop moving. So you do want to have exercise, but it has to still be mild exercise that promotes movement without exhaustion. So a great example for that actually is yoga. Yoga is a great, and this is again vinyasa yoga, or very slow traditional yoga, as opposed to power yoga. You definitely don't want to do power yoga, even in cases of fibromyalgia, where instinctively you would think power yoga would actually be good for them. It not necessarily, because it can be a little bit too intensive, and it can then, they feel good at the time, but when they go home and they rest, they actually feel worse. They will feel even more stiff, because what it does is it may help to melt some of the ama, but it doesn't necessarily digest the ama. And so once the ama melts, it increases in its surface area and it spreads out even more. So therefore they feel even worse. They feel like a blanket has been put over them. That's why that type of exercise isn't actually very beneficial. It just makes it worse. So mild types of exercise such as yoga, and also to have some form of spiritual classes, or classes that help to ground them and help to pacify the issue of the doshas in the mind. Or basically the doshas in the mind is the rajas and tamas, and in this case I definitely think that there's a tamasika quality there, because she does tend to get bouts of depression. And it's partially because of her job, but it's partially because of her condition as well. Her body being so heavy that it's affecting the flow of her mind and inducing more of that tamasika quality in her mind. So I think the best thing to do here is have a mild amount of activity, so get the movement going, as well as start some form of spiritual classes. And that really all depends on the person. If the person has, whatever their preference may be, she actually has a preference to Buddhism. So is she overweight? She is ever so slightly overweight. She's not very significantly overweight, but she tends to think that she's a little bit overweight. I wouldn't say it necessarily as that. I see it as the fact that she has a lot of things. It's a lot of ama that's stuck in her body, and it's affecting all of her dhatus. So if you look at her, it looks like she's overnourished, but she's not really overnourished. It's actually this is a good example of a lot of waste product that is stuck in your body that makes you look like you're overnourished, but you're not nourished at all. Like, for instance, you have other cases where people who are obese and they're actually undernourished. They have all symptoms of malnourishment, but they're obese. This is exactly the same thing, where you have a lot of ama that is stuck, and it's basically bloating up your body, making you look from the external that you have a lot, you have a lot of everything. But actually from the internal, it's almost hollow because the dhatus are not getting nourishment, and they're actually not getting any sort of nourishment for rebuilding and for functioning. So what is actually happening is they're getting stuck, and the ama is getting stuck in all of the channels, and it's basically building up and blowing up like a balloon. And everything gets blown up, but in between, the actual structures themselves are actually malnourished. Okay? And for her, it's the same thing too. That's why she has like very, I mean, it's pretty big ridges on her nails, and that particular style of tongue is very much indicative of extreme, very chronic malabsorption and malnutrition. Okay. So those are some things for diet and lifestyle that we would do. Ideally for her, for the purpose of pain management as well as to get started on the treatment, I would definitely suggest dry type of swedana, which is basically the sand poultice. I think would be ideal for her, or even udvartana. The dry powder massage would be really ideal for her. Now, if you're not a body worker or you don't have a body worker near you who knows how to do this, so that's fine. They don't need udvartana, but they can actually still even do the sand poultice, because sand poultices, as you all know now, fairly easy to make. If you can't make them and sell them to your clients, then you can just have them, get some sand, heat it up a little bit, and then put it in a sock and tie the sock in a nice tight knot, and then use that to kind of do the self-massage. Okay? So that will help to dry out some of the excess moisture and help to melt some of the kapha while also absorbing. I mean, not kapha. So melt some of the ama as well as start to absorb some of the moisture from that ama. Okay, and that's basically looking at the ama on the external pathway, on the bahya pathway. So this could be done from anywhere between 5 to 7 days, and ideally what you would want to do is have to do it every single day. So that's the reason why the sand poultice would be ideal, because this is something they could do at home. If they can't come in, if they're able to come in and have it done with you every day, great. If they can't and they need to do it at home, you can start them off with the treatment yourself first, and then after that you can teach them how to do it at home. Okay, so you want to do that for around 5 to 7 days. I think in her condition it would be probably around 7 days. Then also simultaneously, what I would ideally like to do is advise her to take Yogaraj Guglu with Dashamula Arishta. So if you remember last time we had talked about the one thing that I had added in the treatment list was Arishta, which is a alcoholic preparation. So it is the same Dashamula Kashaya that you would find, the same 10 roots that are beneficial for pacifying Vata. That's there in the list, by the way, in your notes. So same Dashamula, but instead of making it into a decoction, we make it into a fermented drink. And that fermented liquid or that fermented drink actually has a greater, faster level of absorption than the kashaya, because the kashaya or the decoction needs to first be broken down by the Agni and then be absorbed. Whereas arishtas or fermented preparations or alcoholic preparations actually, since they are already fermented and they are very heat producing or very agneya or very much in the fire quality, that they don't actually need to be broken down. As soon as you consume them, they automatically get absorbed and they automatically start to act. So that's why in this situation where the person has ama, and also because of the fact that they are fatigued, that alcoholic preparation does give them a tiny little bit of a burst of energy. So we are using that particular formula to give them the burst of energy to be able to be absorbed even without having to be broken down by the very diminished or non-existent Agni, as well as it helps to enhance the Agni that is there in the stomach, as well as the Dhatu Agnis, as well as dashamula, which helps to pacify vata as well. So in all aspects of this combination or this formula, it works at multiple levels of what's happening in this disease. Okay, so Yogaraj Gugulu and Dashamula Rishta, she can have, Yogaraj Gugulu, typically you want to have like around 1 pill with the Arishta, 30 ml of Arishta, and that's typically taken after food. So I would suggest for her to take that again 2 times per day for a minimum of 2 weeks. Okay. So that I would, that would be the initial sort of treatment plan. And after that, it would be even more ideal if we could do some form of cleanse for her or some form of shodhana for her. Because again, since this is a very chronic case, she definitely needs some form of shodhana. The shamana or the pacification or palliative care with just the medicines alone may not necessarily be sufficient to really make a significant impact in her health. So that's why I think if the doshas are aggravated to this extent and it has gotten so far in the lower dhatus, or it has started to affect the lower dhatus, then remember when we're talking about how doshas can get aggravated, it can get aggravated in the action, the karma, or the matra, or the karma, the matra, or the guna. That's either the function or the quantity or the qualities. Okay? In this case, where you have an aggravation of all 3 of these things of the doshas, then typically it indicates that it has gotten to the stage where it requires shodhana. Okay, it needs for that dosha, the excessive dosha, to be pushed out. So how to prepare her for a shodhana? For her also, the ideal shodhana would be vasti. If we can't do vasti, then we can obviously opt for virechana. Okay, so the preparatory stage for virechana, first she would need, of course, sneha. So for sneha or for the oleation, it would be dhanvantra taila and sahacharadi taila externally application. So in these cases, actually, we want to saturate them with the oil. So abhyanga is just slightly applying. One step ahead of that is when you actually pour the oil on the body. Now, in this situation, sometimes it's difficult to find a facility where you can pour oil. So instead of pouring oil, if you can at least have it, a significant amount slathered on, not just how much you would typically put in abhyanga, but have a significant amount of oil put on the body, that would be great. So these are the 2 oils you can mix in equal quantity. So one is to 1, dhanvantra taila and sahacharadi taila, for external application. Then the sneha is followed by sweda. Sweda, we want to do the patra potali sweda, which is basically when we do the fried leaves, and we make a potli out of that, and then we do that for heating, applying heat to the person. So for instance, you can use, again here, ideally we would want to use arka, which is, remember I showed you the picture over the weekend, calotropis. You do find that in dry climates here in the US. Nergundi, which is Vitex nergundo, and Eranda, which is castor leaves. These are all really great vata pacifying leaves that typically we would fry in castor oil, and we would make that, or we would saute them in castor oil and we would make that into a potli. If we can't do all of that, the great thing is we have nettle leaves, and we use that over the weekend for this purpose because it's a great substitute for these sort of leaves. So you can saute nettle leaves in castor oil and make a potli of that, and that is what is used to apply the heat. Okay? In the same manner of how we did the lime poultices, the same thing we would do with the leaves. So you saute them, put them in the poultice, tie them, and heat up the poultice, and that is applied to the person. Okay? So that's sneha and sweda. Next would be Virechana. So the Virechana here, of course, you'd want to use Gandharvastadi Eranda Taila. And that's also in the list of medicines that we had talked about. It's also there in the notes for the treatment of Amavata. That's there in that last page, okay? So I'm just telling you how we would use it, how you would actually use this for treating this particular case. So you would want to use Gandhavasta Eranda Taila for inducing Virechana, and that would typically need somewhere between 30 to 50 ml of that. And that would help to induce a good amount of Virechana. So typically when you want to induce Virechana for the purpose of cleansing, it's not just 1 or just 2. The person is expected to go a minimum of around 3 to 4 times. And it really depends, the extent or the quality of the Virechana depends on how many times the person goes to the bathroom. What we call, those are termed as Vegas, or the urge to go, okay? So the number of Vegas, or the number of urges that they have, is how we determine how much of cleansing or how much of Shodhana has occurred. If it is only 2 to 3, that means it has become a mild cleanse. If it goes between from 4 to 6 or so, then it's more of a moderate cleanse. And if it goes beyond 6, then it's sort of a extreme cleanse. And the reason why we need to count the number of times is because that determines how much days or how extensive we need to have the post-operative therapy. And the post-operative therapy, or the post-panchakarma therapy, is basically looking at the number of days they have to take the samsajana krama, or the particular diet, for then increasing back their agni. Okay? And I think next week what we'll do is I will describe to you exactly the mechanism of, because we were going to describe this in the last part of the weekend, exactly the mechanism of how panchakarma works in these conditions. Okay, so I'll explain that to you in the next webinar next week. Okay, so typically this is what we want to do. So we want to first try palliative care, or shamana, where we are doing diet, lifestyle, and medicines. Okay. Now, within that frame, in the diet, lifestyle, plus a little bit of dry sweda, which helps in pain management, and then the Yogaraja Gugulu and the Dashamula Rishta, what that's going to do is that's going to help to take care of a lot of this immediate aggravation of doshas. If the case is not as severe as we think it is, then you're going to start to see a significant change within this intervention itself. If the person is not responding, they're not really exhibiting a significant change even with these interventions, then that indicates that they are at an advanced stage and they really do require Shodhana. Okay? So that's why you can kind of divide your treatment plan into the Shamana stage or the palliative stage. And palliative here means really to pacify the aggravation of doshas. That's what we mean when we say pacify